Rising from their shadows. When you defeat a narcissist for the second time and shatter their ego, you do not truly conquer a narcissist merely by walking away. Leaving, blocking, or initiating no contact may feel like victory at first, but psychologists warn that these actions often mark the opening salvo in a far more insidious war. The real battle rarely begins while you are still entwined in their orbit. It ignites after separation, when the narcissist becomes aware that their control over you has slipped. Clinical experts describe this moment as the triggering of a narcissistic injury, a profound psychological wound inflicted on their fragile ego. For survivors, the initial sense of triumph often arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly, the first emotional victory. Perhaps you exposed their lies, perhaps you confronted their behavior with calm clarity, or perhaps you simply chose the serenity of your own well-being over the chaos they thrived on. No matter the form, that first rupture strikes directly at the very core of their self-image, which depends on dominance and validation from others. Yet, for a narcissist, the first defeat is not a terminal point. It is a spark that ignites meticulous planning. According to psychological theory, when the narcissist's ego is wounded, their response is rarely spontaneous, it is calculated. They retreat into mental strategizing, assessing weaknesses, devising legal maneuvers, and exploring avenues of social sabotage. It is a chilling evolution from emotional manipulation to full-scale psychological warfare. Psychologists note that the narcissist's goal is to recreate the sense of omnipotence they experienced while you were under their influence. The emotional impact on the victim is profound. Anxiety spikes, sleep may be disrupted, and the lingering fear of unpredictability can make even ordinary days feel like a minefield. Yet, from a recovery perspective, understanding this as a predictable behavioral pattern, rather than a reflection of your worth, gives survivors a critical edge in reclaiming their autonomy and resilience. The second defeat of a narcissist is far more intricate, psychologically complex, and strategically brutal than the first. Unlike the initial emotional blow, this phase is carefully orchestrated, often taking the form of legal intimidation, financial manipulation, or orchestrated social attacks. Psychologists explain that this strategic escalation arises from the narcissist's desperate need to restore the illusion of invincibility. For victims, the experience can feel like a relentless storm, where every seemingly small attack is calibrated to provoke fear, hesitation, or self-doubt. Yet, it is precisely during this stage that the survivor has the opportunity to turn the tables. By understanding the psychological mechanics of narcissistic retaliation, the obsessive need for control, the susceptibility to validation, and the underlying fear of exposure, a survivor can respond with strategic clarity rather than reactive emotion, dismantling the narcissist's carefully constructed revenge before it achieves its full impact. The first defeat, psychologically speaking, is largely emotional. Walking away, setting boundaries, exposing lies, or simply refusing to engage disrupts the narcissist's dependency on your attention and emotional energy. This is what clinical psychologists term a narcissistic injury, a rupture in the self-esteem that has been artificially bolstered by your reactions. Their fragile self-image fractures, and the grandiose mask they wear begins to crack. For survivors, this feels like liberation. They stop fueling the narcissist's sense of superiority and reclaim control of their own narrative. However, for the narcissist, the first defeat is merely the opening act in a drama of revenge. Their cognitive focus shifts from maintaining appearances to plotting recalibration, seeking ways to reassert dominance while testing boundaries, often without the victim realizing the full scope of their strategy. The second defeat emerges after the narcissist has had time to immerse themselves in their grievance, to obsessively fantasize about retaliation, and to construct a calculated plan. Psychologists describe this as the transition from impulsive aggression to premeditated manipulation, a stage marked by cold, sustained, and often almost convincing attempts to regain control. The frightening reality for the survivor is that these calculated efforts can feel almost plausible, precisely because the narcissist is methodical and patient. However, it is also during this stage that informed survivors, armed with awareness, legal counsel, and a well-established support system, can act decisively. By maintaining emotional detachment, anticipating manipulative tactics, and documenting interactions meticulously, the victim can transform the narcissist's elaborate revenge into evidence of their own resilience and strategic mastery. In this way, the second defeat becomes not only possible but profoundly transformative, exposing the narcissist's vulnerabilities while solidifying the survivor's autonomy. Once the narcissist suffers their first defeat, your departure, your silence, your refusal to feed their ego, they retreat, not in surrender, but in strategy. Psychologists describe this stage as the narcissistic recalibration phase, a cold, calculated period where the narcissist's mind becomes a war room. On the surface, they may appear indifferent, even detached, as if they've finally accepted the end. They might go silent, leaving you with an eerie sense of peace that feels almost too good to be true. Yet behind that calm exterior lies a storm of obsession. Clinical observations reveal that narcissists, when deprived of control, often experience cognitive dissonance, a mental clash between their inflated self-image and the reality of their loss. To reconcile this unbearable gap, they turn to plotting, how can I win again? How can I destroy the person who exposed my weakness? They begin mapping your vulnerabilities, seeking legal loopholes, reconnecting with mutual acquaintances, and quietly planting seeds of misinformation. Each move is a step toward regaining psychological dominance. This regrouping phase is among the most dangerous, precisely because it feels deceptively peaceful. Many victims report a sense of cautious relief, believing the silence marks closure. But as trauma specialists warn, the narcissist's quietness often signals not peace, but preparation. Psychologist Dr. Ramoni Dervisula explains that narcissists thrive on the element of surprise. The calm before the storm is their most effective manipulation tool. It's during this lull that they study your responses, gather resources, and sharpen their tactics. Survivors, unaware of the brewing storm, may let their guard down, returning to normal life while the narcissist's counterattack looms. This is why professionals emphasize maintaining boundaries even during silence. Document everything, secure your finances, and avoid engaging in emotional baiting. Because once the narcissist decides they are ready, they strike with precision. And when they launch that counterattack, their true nature, stripped of charm and pretense, emerges in full. Psychologists call this the mask collapse, when the narcissist's facade of confidence and charisma gives way to raw aggression. They may weaponize the legal system, filing false claims, fabricating evidence, and portraying themselves as the wounded party. This inversion of reality is a defense mechanism called projection, where they assign their own cruelty to you. Their aim is not truth, it's exhaustion. They overwhelm through confusion, dragging you into endless disputes designed to wear down your emotional and financial stability. In many cases, this becomes a form of institutional abuse, where narcissists exploit legal systems or bureaucratic processes as instruments of control. Financially, they withhold money, stall settlements, or sabotage your career, knowing that instability breeds desperation. Some even prolong proceedings intentionally, deriving satisfaction from your visible distress. Psychologists describe this as narcissistic sadism, the emotional gratification they gain from your suffering. The attacks extend beyond paper and law. They seep into your social and emotional world. Narcissists are master illusionists, and their next act is social manipulation. Through smear campaigns, they rewrite the story to cast themselves as the misunderstood hero or the tragic victim, and you, the unstable, vindictive villain. They exploit mutual friends, family members, and colleagues, knowing that public opinion can be as powerful a weapon as any lawsuit. Social psychologists explain that this tactic serves two purposes. It isolates you from potential allies and simultaneously restores their sense of superiority through public sympathy. For the victim, the experience is profoundly disorienting. Once trusted relationships fracture, and social circles shrink. The key, therapists advise, is to resist the urge to defend yourself to everyone who has been swayed. Instead, conserve your energy for those who truly listen and for legal or emotional avenues that create lasting protection. Silence, in these moments, is not weakness, it is strategic dignity. Yet perhaps the cruelest front of this psychological war is the one that strikes closest to the heart. When narcissists can no longer control you directly, they attempt to harm what you love most: your relationships, your children, your sense of safety. Family therapists often see this as a final, desperate act of power reclamation. They may manipulate your children emotionally, attempting to turn them against you, or subtly poison friendships with insinuations and lies. They want you to feel constantly watched, constantly reminded of their reach. This is a tactic of psychological intrusion, meant to instill hypervigilance and fear, pushing you to doubt your own autonomy. For the narcissist, this cruelty restores a fleeting illusion of control. For the victim, it can feel like suffocation. Clinical recovery strategies in this phase often center on grounding techniques, methods to help survivors reconnect with reality and reclaim a sense of internal safety amid external chaos. The most effective counter to their control is not reaction, but resilience, emotional regulation, clear documentation, and unwavering boundaries. As their attacks escalate, it can indeed appear as though they are winning. The court battles drag on, the financial strain grows unbearable, and the smear campaigns fracture your reputation. Many survivors describe this phase as living in an invisible cage, every breath heavy, every step uncertain. Sleep fades, friendships wither, and hope begins to erode. Psychologists liken this state to trauma fatigue, where prolonged exposure to psychological stress creates emotional numbness and cognitive exhaustion. And this, tragically, is exactly what the narcissist desires: your depletion. They feed off your despair because, to them, every sign of your collapse reaffirms their power. But it's crucial to understand, this stage, as brutal as it feels, is also the prelude to their ultimate undoing. For as psychology consistently teaches, control built on fear eventually implodes when met with calm awareness and strategy. The victim's greatest weapon is not retaliation, but insight, knowing that every act of cruelty exposes the narcissist's unraveling mind more than it damages your own. The narcissist's ultimate goal during this drawn-out war is to drain you completely. They want you exhausted, terrified, and trapped under relentless pressure, because they know that prolonged stress weakens the mind and spirit. Psychologists explain that narcissists thrive on what they call chronic stress induction, a form of psychological warfare designed to create anxiety, hypervigilance, and learned helplessness in their targets. For the victim, this manifests as sleepless nights, fractured concentration, and a creeping sense of despair. The danger of the second defeat lies precisely in its duration. Unlike the first blow, which may have been emotional and abrupt, this is a marathon, a sustained attack that can stretch over months or even years. Clinical observations show that long-term exposure to this kind of manipulation can trigger trauma symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress, as the victim continually faces emotional, social, and financial assaults. Yet, within this chaos lies the opportunity for the survivor to flip the narrative entirely. Psychologists emphasize that emotional regulation is the cornerstone of resilience against narcissistic abuse. Survivors who succeed in the second defeat do not react impulsively to provocation. Instead, they respond strategically, converting fear into actionable intelligence. Legal counsel becomes an essential ally, documentation a shield, and careful observation a weapon. By refusing to engage with provocations and redirecting emotional energy into preparation, victims reclaim agency over a situation the narcissist had hoped would consume them entirely. The wisdom here, as trauma experts highlight, is in recognizing the battlefield. The fight is not about proving your innocence to bystanders, often referred to as flying monkeys, but about dismantling the narcissist's power in spaces that truly matter, behind the scenes and through concrete, measurable actions. This calculated approach transforms the survivor into an unpredictable force, capable of dismantling the narcissist's intricate manipulations one deliberate step at a time. Psychologists note that narcissists rely on the illusion of predictability and control. When this illusion is shattered, their strategies falter. Slowly exposing lies through documented evidence, strategic legal action, and measured public presence allows the survivor to reclaim the narrative. Eventually, the elaborate facade the narcissist constructed begins to crumble. False witnesses waver under questioning, smear campaigns lose momentum as inconsistencies become apparent, and the financial manipulations collapse under scrutiny. The narcissist realizes, often too late, that their carefully orchestrated plans have failed. Psychologists describe this as the unmasking effect, the moment when the narcissist's projected omnipotence shatters, leaving them vulnerable and exposed. The psychological impact on the narcissist is profound. While the first defeat bruised their ego, The second defeat annihilates the carefully maintained illusion of control and, in essence, erases their constructed identity. Narcissistic personality disorder relies on an internalized sense of superiority and dominance. When both are dismantled, the narcissist experiences an intense psychological collapse akin to identity erosion. They had invested vast resources, time, reputation, and strategic planning into ensuring your downfall, believing that their attack would be insurmountable. But when the plan fails, they confront an experience few can tolerate: total loss of control. Experts in personality disorders note that this loss triggers a range of reactions, from rage and disbelief to social withdrawal and desperate attempts to reclaim significance. But the reality is inescapable. The power they assumed over you no longer exists, and never will. For the survivor, this second defeat marks a turning point not only in the external battle but in internal liberation. Psychologists highlight that achieving this outcome reinforces self-efficacy and restores a sense of mastery that narcissistic abuse systematically erodes. The victim emerges with renewed confidence, clear boundaries, and an understanding that no manufactured drama or external coercion can dictate their reality. It is the culmination of resilience, strategy, and psychological insight, a triumph over manipulation that reshapes the survivor's life. The second defeat, though often invisible to the public eye, is a profound psychological victory, signaling the final unraveling of a narcissist's dominion and the restoration of personal power and agency. When the narcissist finally realizes that even their most calculated strategies could not break you, the shock is overwhelming. For someone whose identity is constructed around dominance, control, and the illusion of winning, this realization is unbearable. Psychologists explain that narcissists have a fragile sense of self, dependent on external validation and the subjugation of others. When their efforts fail, this fragile ego is confronted with an undeniable truth: their carefully orchestrated control has crumbled. The emotional response is intense and often chaotic, a volatile mix of rage, disbelief, and cognitive dissonance. They may attempt one last desperate maneuver, but without strategy or planning, it is sloppy and ineffective, a symbolic admission that their psychological leverage has been dismantled. Clinically, this is described as a narcissistic collapse, where the dissonance between their self-image and reality produces overwhelming psychological distress. Not all narcissists respond the same way after such a collapse, but certain patterns are strikingly common. Some retreat entirely, disappearing into silence as the humiliation of failure becomes too much to bear. Psychologists note that this retreat is not a sign of recovery but of avoidance, a desperate attempt to protect their fragile ego. Others spiral outward, seeking immediate distractions to fill the void left by their loss of control, jumping into new relationships, immersing themselves in work or hobbies, or doubling down on the carefully curated image they present to the world. A subset will attempt repair over time, trying to regain influence, but these efforts are often half-hearted and ineffective because the survivor now perceives the truth beneath the manipulation, and the narcissist's illusions no longer hold sway. This exposure fundamentally shifts the psychological balance, leaving the narcissist unable to operate within their usual patterns of control. For the survivor, the implications of this dynamic are profound. The second defeat is not just a continuation of prior struggles. It is a defining crucible. Psychologists emphasize that this stage is often more emotionally taxing than the first because it is prolonged, complex, and unpredictable. Many survivors underestimate the psychological weight of this phase, and without preparation or awareness, it can threaten to destabilize one's sense of self, induce anxiety, and trigger residual trauma. Yet, those who navigate it with strategic foresight emerge with something transformative: an unshakable inner strength and a clarity that can only arise from having faced the narcissist's most severe attacks and remained standing. By maintaining composure, leveraging documentation, and focusing on strategic actions rather than emotional reactions, survivors reclaim their agency and rebuild a sense of invulnerability that no manipulative tactic can erode. The paradox of this victory is that while the narcissist is left reeling in the aftermath, the survivor experiences empowerment. Psychologists describe this as a reversal of the trauma cycle. Instead of being perpetually victimized, the survivor becomes the architect of their own narrative, capable of discerning threats, setting boundaries, and maintaining autonomy. The narcissist, in contrast, is forced to confront the humiliating truth that their grand design failed, a reality that their ego can never fully reconcile. They are left with a psychological scar akin to a permanent dent in the self-image they carefully constructed for years, a reminder that power built on manipulation is always tenuous and, ultimately, breakable. I would love to hear from you. What has your experience been in navigating the aftermath of a narcissist's strategies? Share your thoughts in the comments. As we close this discussion, remember that the journey of recovery is ongoing. Each act of resilience, each decision to stand firm, contributes to healing. Thank you for listening, and until the next episode, let the process of restoration continue, guiding you towards strength, clarity, and freedom.